All right, so today we're going to take a deep dive into a pretty unsettling case, the Charlie Chopoff case.
Yeah.
Um, and you know this one is a real head scratcher.
Mm-hmm.
And you've asked us for a full download. You want to know who this killer might have been?
Right?
You want to know the details of the crimes and why we still don't have all the answers?
Yeah.
We've got some excerpts from a Wikipedia article and what seems to be a police document to work with.
Okay.
So let's see what we can piece together here.
Sounds good.
Now, it's important to remember that the killer was never actually caught.
Right. That's huge. That adds a whole other layer of complexity to this.
Absolutely. So we're already dealing with a mystery.
Right.
And then the fact that he was never caught just makes it even more intriguing and difficult to solve.
Absolutely.
So we're talking about 1970s New York City.
Yeah.
A time when the city was really grappling with some serious issues like skyrocketing crime rates.
Right.
I mean, think about those gritty, almost lawless, films that are set in that era.
Oh, yeah, for
And
sure.
That's the backdrop we're dealing with here for this whole story.
Yeah, it's an important context to keep in mind, I think.
Totally.
You know, the fear and uncertainty people must felt
Right.
when these attacks started happening.
Yeah.
It wasn't just a crime. It was like, a crack in the fabric of their everyday lives.
Absolutely.
This was a very different New York.
Okay, so the first case that the sources mentioned here is just chilling. Sends chills down your spine.
Yeah.
March 1972, 8-year-old Douglas Owens is found stabbed multiple times.
Oh, my gosh.
And, he'd been mutilated.
Ugh. It's brutal. No way around it.
Yeah.
And this wasn't just like a one-off incident.
Right.
Just a month later, another young boy. Thankfully, this one survived.
Oh, wow.
But the mutilation was the same.
Jeez.
So, a pattern was starting to emerge, and it was terrifying.
And all of these attacks were in very specific areas of the city, right?
Yeah.
So it's not like it was random, it seems like. This killer was picking victims very carefully.
Yeah. And they were all young boys,
Right.
That level of specificity, right?
Yeah.
Suggests something more than just random violence.
Right.
It points toward a very particular motive.
Yeah.
Even if we can't quite decipher it yet.
Totally. Okay, so we've got this horrifying pattern starting to develop. And then in October of 72, there's another victim. 9-year-old Wendell Hubbard, also dead. Also mutilated.
Yeah.
Almost like a replay of the first murder.
And this time it really sent shockwaves through the city.
Yeah.
You have to remember, forensic science wasn't nearly as advanced as it is today.
Right.
The idea of a killer targeting children this way, it was like something out of a nightmare.
So fast forward to 1973, and there are 2 more attacks that the sources mention.
Okay.
A 9-year-old Luis Ortiz attacked in March.
What's interesting about Luis Ortiz is that he was the first victim who wasn't black.
Right.
Up until that point, all the victims had been young black boys. Which, makes you wonder if there were any biases influencing the investigation at the time.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
And then in August of 73, another attack on an 8-year-old Stephen Cropper. Tragically, he didn't survive this one.
Oh.
Although the sources suggest that the killer didn't complete the attack in the same way.
Right. That detail is very curious.
Yeah.
Did something interrupt the attack?
Right.
Was the killer's MO evolving?
Mm-hmm.
It raises a lot of questions.
It does. Okay, so we've got these terrifying crimes happening. We've got this mystery unfolding. And then the sources introduce a possible suspect, a man named Ernesto Soto.
Right.
So what's the deal with him?
Well, Soto actually confessed to one of the murders,
Oh, wow.
but was declared unfit to stand trial.
Mm-hmm.
So he was placed in a mental institution instead.
Right.
But here's where things get even stranger. There's a chance that Soto actually escaped from that institution.
Really?
Multiple times.
Wait a minute, multiple times.
Yeah.
So that completely changes things.
Right.
If he was escaping, could he have been responsible for the other attacks, even while supposedly confined?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And to make things even more complicated, the attacks actually stopped after Soto was arrested.
So was he Charlie Chopoff, or is this a case where there's more to the story than meets the eye? Maybe even another killer entirely.
Yeah,
This is getting really complicated.
It's hard to say for sure. It's officially unsolved. Soto's connection to these murders is definitely significant.
Right.
But we can't definitively say that he acted alone.
Right.
Or was even responsible for all the attacks.
Okay, so that's kind of where we are. We have this unsolved case. We have this confessed killer who may not have been mentally competent to even stand trial.
Right.
and then these attacks that stop after his arrest. But there's that detail about the last victim
Yeah.
that really kind of throws a wrench into things.
Right, Stephen Cropper,
Yeah.
the fact that the mutilation wasn't present in his case,
Right.
that's a huge anomaly. Was it a time constraint? Did something spook the attacker?
Right.
Or was this potentially a different person altogether?
It's like we're trying to put together this puzzle,
Yeah,
and we're missing pieces, and the pieces that we do have keep changing shape.
right.
So what do the sources tell us, and what are we still left wondering? Could there have been more than one killer involved?
It's a valid question,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
The shift in victim demographics, with Luis Ortiz being the first non-Black victim,
Yeah.
makes you wonder,
Right.
was there another individual involved?
Yeah.
Or did Sfoto's motives maybe or
Mhm.
methods evolve over time?
And why were these specific children targeted? Was it purely random? Or was there some deeper, more sinister connection
Yeah.
that we're not seeing?
Yeah.
Maybe something that wasn't even obvious to investigators at the time.
Yeah, that's one of the most perplexing aspects of this case. You know,
Right.
the sources don't really give us a clear answer.
Yeah.
You know, we see the geographical clustering of the attacks, but there's no readily apparent link between the victims themselves.
It's so frustrating knowing that these families still don't have answers.
Oh, absolutely.
And then there's that whole issue of Soto's mental state.
Right.
You mentioned that he was deemed unfit to stand trial. What does that actually mean in legal terms?
Right.
And how did that decision affect the investigation?
Well, unfit to stand trial basically means that due to mental illness, a defendant is unable to understand the charges against them
Okay.
or assist in their own defense. A
Right.
very complex
Well,
legal concept, and, you know, it has significant ethical implications.
so in Soto's case, the court basically determined that his mental state prevented him from even participating in a fair trial.
Exactly.
Did that shift the focus of the investigation away from him, even though he had confessed?
It's impossible to say for certain without access to more detailed records, you know?
Yeah.
But it certainly adds another layer of complexity to this already
Right.
complex case. Imagine you're an investigator on this case.
Right.
You have a confession, but the legal system says that this suspect can't be tried. So where do you go from there?
It's such a heartbreaking situation all around, and it makes you think about the challenges that law enforcement faced back then.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, criminal profiling wasn't the sophisticated science that it is today.
Exactly. Profiling techniques were really in their infancy back in the 1970s.
Yeah.
They didn't have the data analysis and the psychological frameworks that
Yeah.
we have now. So imagine trying to understand a killer's motives
Yeah.
and predict their next move with limited tools and understanding.
So we're trying to understand this case through the lens of a very different time,
Right.
both in terms of law enforcement and societal context.
Yeah.
What other factors from that era might be influencing our understanding of this case?
Well, I think the media's role in shaping public perception is a big one. You know,
Wow.
sensationalized reporting and, you know, nicknames like Charlie Chopoff
Right.
certainly played a role in, you know, amplifying the fear surrounding the case.
Absolutely. And the sources even point out how some publications got the suspect's name wrong because they went with a pseudonym used in a book. They called him Miguel Rivera.
Oh, wow.
Talk about adding confusion to an already complex situation.
Right.
It really underscores how misinformation, whether intentional or not,
Yeah,
can muddy the waters, especially in these high-profile cases.
absolutely.
It's a reminder to always be critical of the information that we consume,
Right.
even from seemingly credible sources.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got all these moving parts. Is there anything else from the 1970s that we should keep in mind as we try to make sense of this case?
Well, the social and political climate of the 1970s was pretty turbulent.
Right.
There was a lot of unrest, a sense of things changing really rapidly.
Yeah.
Do you think that played a role in how this case was investigated
Yeah.
or even perceived by the public?
I think it's definitely something to consider. When you
Yeah.
have a society grappling with such significant change,
Yeah.
I think it can impact everything. You know,
Right.
law enforcement priorities to public anxieties. It's possible that the Charlie Chopoff case,
Yeah.
became a focal point for a lot of those anxieties.
For sure.
A symbol of the perceived chaos of the time.
It's like the city itself becomes a character in this drama.
Yeah, almost. Right.
A city on edge,
Right.
grappling with its own demons.
Yeah, it is a chilling thought. So let's try to kind of piece this all together for our listener.
Okay.
We've got these brutal attacks on young boys in 1970s New York City, a place already struggling with high crime rates
Right.
and a sense of unease. We have a possible suspect, Ernesto Soto, who confesses but is deemed unfit to stand trial.
Mm.
And then all these unsettling details.
Yeah.
You know, the mutilations, the unanswered questions about motive, and the possibility of another killer.
Right, and all of that is taking place within this larger context of, evolving forensic techniques, societal anxieties,
Right.
and the media's tendency to sensationalize.
Right.
It's this perfect storm of factors that make this case so difficult to fully comprehend even decades later.
And that's, I think, part of what makes it so fascinating.
Yeah, I agree.
The fact that we're still trying to make sense of it,
Right.
piecing together these fragments of information, trying to understand the why behind it all.
Sometimes the most compelling stories are the ones that leave us with more questions than answers.
Absolutely.
They force us to think critically,
Yeah.
consider different perspectives, and acknowledge that we may never have the complete picture.
So where does that leave us? What's the takeaway for our listener who's been on this deep dive with us today?
I would say this: stay curious.
Yes.
Keep asking questions.
Right.
This case, with all of its complexities and unknowns, really highlights how history is full of these unsolved puzzles.
Absolutely.
And it reminds us that the search for understanding is an ongoing process.
Yeah, it's like we've been peeling back the layers of an onion, and with every layer we peel back,
Right.
there's just another layer underneath it.
Yeah.
And just when you think you're getting close to the core, you realize there's still so much more to uncover.
That's a great analogy.
And maybe that's the most important takeaway from this deep dive.
I think so.
The understanding that sometimes that journey of exploration is just as valuable as the destination.
Yeah.
The process of asking questions,
Right.
examining the evidence,
Mm.
and considering different perspectives can be incredibly rewarding,
For sure.
even if we never arrive at a definitive answer.
Absolutely.
Well said. It's a reminder that even in the face of something as dark and disturbing as the Charlie Chopoff case,
Yeah.
there's still room for intellectual curiosity,
Right.
for seeking understanding,
Hmm.
for appreciating the complexities of human behavior
Absolutely.
and the world around us.
It's true. And who knows, maybe someday new evidence will surface.
Right.
Shedding some more light on this mystery.
Yeah.
But until then,
Right.
we're left with the pieces that we have and the challenge of making sense of them.
And that's the beauty of it, right?
Mhm.
The case may be cold,
Right.
but the conversation continues. So to our listener,
Yeah.
keep exploring,
Keep questioning.
keep questioning, and remember,
Yeah.
sometimes the most fascinating stories are the ones that remain unsolved.
Absolutely.
Until next time, stay curious.